Bismillah walhamdulillah wassalatu wassalam ala rasulillah. We wanted to focus on the whole concept of spiritual counsels in today's time and what that means. One of the things that we confront that's extremely problematic, and unfortunately a lot of the orientation that we get in today's time from the religious community, a lot of times is not really keeping up with what is necessary in order to be able to reach the heart. And what I mean by that is that the necessity for us to have a deep human contact with each other, and the necessity for there to be an intimate encounter between the person that is guiding and the person that is being guided, is something which is not dispensed. In other words, mass technology, or the ability to reach tons of people, it brings its own benefits, but at the same time it has its own crisis. A lot of what we're seeing today, as far as how religion is directed, and this is across the board when we look at religions overall, it really is in line with the way that the marketplace has gone. An authentic spiritual guidance, encounter and connection between people is really something that's missing. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that there's a real breakdown in community life. And so in a time of crisis, people are looking for a more intimate encounter. They're looking for direction on a personal level. And what we're beginning to see more and more is everybody's jumping online and giving these general advices and so on and so forth. And there's a plethora of that. There's a lot of people doing that. We don't really need that. And tons of people don't really need to be talking at one time, especially if the ideas are clashing. But what is needed is for people to be available to listen to others and to be there for others on a more intimate level, right? And this is something that really is extremely important, because you can't automate a spiritual guide and an imam, and you can't automate those people that are solid counselors in personal and spiritual development. You can't automate that process. And the unfortunate thing is that is something that we have seen within the last couple of decades. People look for people to follow them and people to be part of their circle. And what they do is that they collect followers, but they don't really engage in the whole what we call the tarbiyah process. Collecting followers and being, a person that becomes famous, so to speak, and has your face and your name published everywhere, and you're spotlighted. That may help to a certain extent to get a message across. But at the end of the day, when it comes to helping people on the personal level, that unless you're going to use your resources that you gain from becoming a person that's famous and so on and so forth, that's not going to help in that process of development. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and many of the prophets, we find that they had a deep connection with the people, right? And this is the thing that we keep avoiding, and this is the problem that we keep dismissing, is that really what has taken us into a lot of different paths of destruction is the breakdown of community, the breakdown of family, the breakdown of interpersonal connections, the breakdown of intimacy. So, we see the power of reaching tons of people. We see the power of that. But, if that's going to be the mode by which we do our interaction with the community, then we're replaceable, easily replaced. Because all you have to do is have a video of a good speech, a video of this person or that person, and you have someone answering calls, and that's it. Let people listen at that level, at the level of mass. And there's a disconnection, at the level where tons of people are being reached. But that's not what's needed. What's needed is for people to make themselves available and to be able to listen to people's issues and to be able to guide them on an interpersonal level and give them an advice which is suitable. And you find this is where there's a big failure. We're good at giving general advice, but then when it comes to giving advice on a spiritual level for individual people that are going through their own personal struggles, and then all of a sudden you find that those people that are seeking that type of advice, they're not able to find anyone to speak to, anyone to talk to, right? And this shows how much commercialization has impacted, guidance on the spiritual level. And this shows that, we've gone for the marketing schemes and we've gone for the targets, but we've forgotten the human being. And that has never been the case. Even when it came to fatwa was never meant to be given at a mass level where you're talking to 5,000 people, 100,000 people, and you're giving one fatwa for 100,000 people or 10,000 people. That was never the case. Although we need a model for that, where we can speak in generalities, and that's best done if you have a group of scholars that are kind of studying the issue and they're speaking, and maybe they have a representative. But one individual person is not going to be able to give advice to tons of people like that at that level and be accurate and exact and be effective. And so we need to realize that spiritual guidance is very interpersonal. It's very interpersonal. When a person is having a breakdown, that's why, psychology is about the psyche, is about the individual. Now, social psychology is dealing with the group. But, the psychology is about dealing with the individual. And so if we're talking about, guiding people and helping them at the individual level, you know what I'm saying? And that's what we're saying that we're doing, then we have to get back to that in actual practice. And that takes time. It takes effort. It takes patience. It takes involvement. It takes commitment. And that takes support for the people that are doing that type of work. But, we've come to the point of, because we failed on that note, we're trying to reach tons of people, and we're failing on that note too. Because in reaching tons of people, how much are we doing to mobilize people? How much are we doing to really impact? That doesn't mean that there's no benefit. But if we talk about the sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and how it was that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam built a community, he didn't build the community just based on a khutbah type of approach where he was just talking to the masses. They knew who he was. They knew who he was. They interacted with him. They were engaged with him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he had an impact on them. And I remind you, and I've said this before, not because it's me saying it, but because it is a teaching, that when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam interacted with the people, they felt as though that they were the only ones, better said, that were the point of attention. They were the only ones that were the point of attention. And a lot of times, that's where healing takes place, where people feel loved, they feel engaged, they feel that they have support. And the Prophet ﷺ, he helped people in such a way with the means that he had, or he procured the means to be able to help them. And so that shows, whether it was spiritual advice or material support, the Prophet ﷺ was there to such an extent that the people felt that he had their backs, that he had their supports. And we, in this time, that's especially needed. When you start talking about dealing with people that are, have depression or are suicidal or have anxiety or this and that, general advice only goes but so far. But if they know that you're there and that you have their support, that you have the support for them, and they know that they can count on you, that goes a long way. And that is the type of bonding that's necessary, in moments of crisis. And that's the type of bonding which brings about transformation. Even in education, we find that the Montessori approach to education is very effective. Why? Because it deals with the individual in the context of the group. It deals with individual need. We find that in special education has a lot of power to it. Why? Because it differentiates the needs of the individual outside of the needs of the group while understanding that that individual operates in the community, right? And so you have to combine the two approaches, the social psychology with the individual psychology. You have to combine the collective with the individual, right? And so in that sense, you can't dispense of an imam or a sheikh or a spiritual guide or a counselor, and at the same time you can't dispense of having to reach the collective. Both are necessary, and we find that that's the key. But without having that consciousness, we think that we're doing a lot of work, we're just doing talks, which is beneficial, but it's not going to reach the people, in the sense that's needed in many cases. We are at a time period where there's a lot of mental health breakdown, and mental health is not solved with just general advice. Mental health is addressed. Mental health, a lot of times, it overlaps with spiritual issues. That's addressed with dealing with people's individual issues. The same thing with helping people. Helping people demands that, the situation of the individual, and you're able to respond to that individual's needs. And so, in general, even outside from being an imam or a spiritual counselor or a sheikh or educator, this and that, we ourselves as individuals in our interpersonal lives, with our families, with our friends, we have to realize that, making that experience count, our interpersonal experience with each other count, is what brings healing, is what brings connectedness, is what builds community. We use these social media means to build bonds, but there's another aspect of that, the interpersonal dimension. And what you find is that that's where a lot of people, they don't want to deal with it at that level. Why? Because the interpersonal dynamics are very corrupt and screwed up. How many people will really accept a message that comes in their messenger box from an individual? Many times, with the stuff that you're hearing that comes through the messenger for people is things that they want to avoid because it's full of corruption, right? And so that shows that at the interpersonal level, we're not willing to share. We may be willing to share on social media in the general sense, but when it comes to the more intimate sense, we're not willing to share because there's trust issues, because there's issues of corruption, there's tons of other issues. And that's not always the case, but that has become the way that our interpersonal relationships have been described, at least at this level, social media. And social media is not too far off always from representing where reality is at. And so, we have to come back to that, develop our interpersonal relationships with each other, and we have to realize that there is no spiritual development and there is no spiritual guidance, without there being an interpersonal, intimate connection. Because after all, you're talking about the development of an individual, right? And there has to be familiarity with that individual. If a person has a problem, it may seem like the problem of another, but until you listen closely to that individual, you're not really going to understand, right? And a lot of times that's what is missing. And I end on that note. Building solid, healthy, interpersonal relationships that allow us to grow and to heal and to deal with our issues and to allow us to be a healthy community. There was a Puerto Rican educator, and I want to end on this note, Eugenio Maria de Hostos, that he had in his time period, he took up the idea that the individual is the most important unit of the society. And so that educational process begins from the individual. And of course, we don't go with that 100% because the community has this role. But it's just a point to emphasize that is, part of where we have to look at if we wanted to talk about growth and healing. Dealing with each other. One-on-one. Assalamu alaikum.